佐藤先生、よろしくお願いします。パネルディスカッションです。よろしくお願いします。
はい、じゃあここから英語でということになります。Thank you very much. So now let us get started the panel discussion entitled Learning in Hiroshima, Research Reports by International Researchers. But before that, I'd like to explain a little bit about what HPP Fellowship is. The Hiroshima Peace Platform, what we call HPP, has established the HPP Research Program Fellowship. This is a short-time residency program. HPP invites overseas graduate students as well as scholars to Hiroshima and support their research activities at Hiroshima University or Hiroshima City University. Okay, so now I'm going to explain the procedure in this panel. Firstly, I'd like to welcome the three speakers. Each speaker has 10 minutes to present. And secondly, I'm going to ask them some questions. And lastly, I would like to welcome Nakamitsu-san, and so please give us their comments or questions. Okay, so I'd like to move on the first speaker. So first speaker is Flankko Escobar-san from Kiehl University, United Kingdom. So would you play a recorded video, please?
Hello, my name is Flankko Castro Escobar, and I am a PhD candidate at Kiehl University. And my research, in essence, is about young people in the nuclear age, how young people organize in the 21st century for nuclear disarmament. My research has been funded by the Kiehl University David Bruce Center for the Study of the Americas and also the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences. And last year I was a fellow at the Hiroshima Peace Institute, which means I spent 3 very productive months conducting my research. So for this presentation, I was asked to speak for about 10 minutes about how I've used what I learned in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Tokyo upon my return to the UK, and also to update you on the progress of my doctoral research. So as an educator who's now engaged in teaching, the first thing that I would like to highlight is that in October 2024, we brought to Kiehl University a virtual reality headset, which is sometimes used at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum and by the Hiroshima Peace Promotion Division. And you may be familiar with this, but we first used it with our undergraduate students of an international relations undergraduate module on peace and war. And for our students, this was the first time that they could see Hiroshima in an educational environment, not from the perspective of the Enola Gay, from the airplane and in black and white, but from the perspective of someone who would have been standing at the Aioi Bridge on the ground and in color. Some of our students were exchange Japanese students from Tokyo who had never been to Hiroshima. Others were British citizens, and others were members of a diaspora community or generations that have settled in the UK. As you can see on the left, we also use this headset with local faculty, scientists, and you can see David Elwood from British Pugwash as well. So thanks to this, we have a PhD student at Kiehl. Her name is Susie Jones, and she helps to organize in Sherwood Forest, which is the forest of Robin Hood. She organizes a commemorative event called Spirit of Wartime, where more than 5,000 people come for more or less 2 days, and they set up camps, tents, they dress up in clothes as if it was 1945, and they engage in reenactments of battles. You can see Spitfire airplanes flying, weapons, vehicles, and throughout the event there are several talks. So here you can see the box containing the VR headset in Thorsby Park in Sherwood Forest, and our stand was next to a table exhibiting war toys. and also we were surrounded by, tents and campsites that reenacted World War II. I wanted to highlight this event in particular because when commemorative events of Victory in Europe Day or others take place, they usually take a very either national or continental perspective. And this was the first time that this living history exhibition in Sherwood Forest had any materials about Japan. So we were able to provide the 5,000 plus attendees with the VR experience if they were interested, people of all ages, but also the reenactors, also the people who participate in the living history exhibits. And they could also access books such as Hadashi no Gen, Pikadon, some hibakusha stories in the format of kamishibai storytelling, among many other books that we brought from Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The second thing I would like to highlight are the seeds from Hibakujumoku, atomic bomb survivor trees from Hiroshima that we are growing at Kiel University. I was first made aware of these seeds, the program from Green Legacy Hiroshima, thanks to one of the interviews I had while I was a fellow at Hiroshima. Here you can see in these photos that we planted our first ginkgo seed on the 6th of June 2025. Then it grew a few centimeters. You can see here the pencil as comparison. And now they have even changed from green to yellow during the autumn here in the UK. And we are waiting for them to be strong enough to be planted on our campus. As you can see, a couple weeks ago, our ginkgos dropped their leaves, and now we have 3 pots of alive ginkgos that are cozy, awaiting for the winter break. The reason why I wanted to highlight this specific initiative is that these seeds have enabled me as an educator to collaborate with colleagues like Dr. Sarah Taylor, who's an expert in ecology, and we have produced educational resources like these posters you see here on the screen, where we explain what atomic bomb survivor trees are while engaging with the history and geography of Hiroshima in relation to the atomic bomb, but also engaging with the science of life and death, explaining why ginkgos are not just atomic bomb survivors, but also geological survivors with a very rich history, evolutionary history, which, by the way, Dr. Sarah Taylor is documenting and detailing in blogs that you can access through the QR code. Actually, Kiel University has one of the largest collections of cherry blossom trees in the UK, with more than 300 trees and more than 230 varieties, which were laid out in the late 1940s. The ginkgo seeds that we brought from Hiroshima will be planted in front of a peace garden that's being built right now at the cherry tree walk, which you can see here on the screen on the top left image. You can see that both Sarah and I have given talks about this Hibakujumoku, and we have found that these are excellent tools for education. And I should say not just education, but also engagement with public audiences. So both Sarah and I have given talks with BBC Radio, and this initiative has received coverage by national and local media. And Dr. Sarah in particular has also given talks on ginkgo as a geological and atomic survivor in specialized groups such as natural history groups. So there you go. You can see that my fellowship at the Hiroshima Peace Institute enabled me to do much more than write my doctoral research. But let me tell you now about my research. So in my project, what I'm trying to do is to trace how and why young people participate in nuclear disarmament or anti-nuclear groups. And I do this by trying to trace their early encounters with the concept of nuclear weapons all the way through their first activity joining an anti-nuclear group or initiative. So in the case of Japan, this may be what your parents said to you about what the atomic bomb is and the role it plays in the world, and perhaps you participated in a commemorative ceremony on August 6th or 9th, or perhaps you just watched on TV the live streams, you went to the museums, you read some books, some films, or perhaps you joined some kind of group, some kind of musical or artistic activity, and maybe you even joined a group that collects signatures and petitions for specific political outcomes. In my thesis, I do exactly the same with a comparative framework about Canada. How do young people first learn about nuclear weapons, or what can they recall about their education about nuclear weapons? Perhaps it is, for some of them, encountering the English translation by Eleanor Corer of Sadako and the Thousand Paper Cranes, or perhaps it's through the symbolism of the campaign for nuclear disarmament as a peace symbol, perhaps a little less likely, but the museums on human rights and the curriculum in their high school education. And what do? Do they write and draw banners and posters that they can use, or do they engage in other forms of political activity? Why do they do this? How did they do this? And what do they say about these activities? For the specific case of Japan, I would like to invite you to go to the Intergenerational Justice Review website, and you will find there should be two volumes of the issue topic on nuclear risks and long-term peacekeeping. On the second volume, you'll find my article called Youth Anti-Nuclear Socialization in Japan, Early Encounters with the Concept of Nuclear Weapons, where I discuss some of these preliminary findings from my PhD thesis. In particular, what do young people recall about their early encounters with the concept of nuclear weapons? And what does this tell us about the influence of Japan's peace education on their political participation in nuclear disarmament? Some of the key points in this article are that young people who were very active in anti-nuclear or disarmament groups perceived their peace education or their early encounters with the concept of nuclear weapons to have been unrelated with the present. It didn't feel like an atomic bomb could happen to them. There were no immediate threats. It was just a historical thing, and it seemed to be actually very repetitive. It was also insufficient to motivate political action. It was not their stuff. It was not about them, and it was just kind of scary. Moreover, some of my interviewees expressed a kind of fear or stigma of being associated with anti-nuclear activism, saying that they were not out yet as anti-nuclear activists, or explaining that they felt very embarrassed when they first participated in a protest, and they couldn't share much with their friends about these kind of activities. Lastly, there was a kind of age differentiation where they saw anything related to nuclear abolition as being for older generations and not necessarily for young people. So to conclude, it was very interesting that none of the interviewees described their peace education as a key reason why they joined an anti-nuclear group. Instead, they saw their early encounters with the concept of nuclear weapons as failing to instill a sense of existential urgency or collective efficacy or some other motivation. This suggests that either they are right and their motivations to join anti-nuclear groups are related to alternative reasons, or B, they may be undervaluing how much peace education actually influenced or socialized them. So there's this kind of contradiction that while peace education efforts involve a dense network of parents, hibakusha, museums, government officials, civil society, and the mobilization of tangible and intangible resources such as, books, curricula, urban design, school trips, survivor testimonies, etc., etc., all of which is trying to socialize them against war and against nuclear weapons. At least we could say that these young participants active in nuclear disarmament networks acquired a sense that nuclear disarmament was desirable and positive, which is why they joined these groups. However, I am still working on the comparative framework with the cases from Canada, and I look forward to explaining more about that on another occasion. I wish you all a very good symposium. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Escobar-san. Thank you very much. So next, I'd like to welcome the second speaker. So Elisabeth, if you are ready, she's from the Open University, UK. So if you are ready, would you?
Hello, everybody. 皆さんこんにちは。Oh, are you ready? I'm here. It's wonderful to be here in person, face to face. I would like to thank my hosts for inviting me here to give this talk. It's my 10th visit to Hiroshima in a 20-year period. When I first was invited to conduct research for my thesis, which is entitled Hibakusha Narratives in Context, a Dialogical Approach, I was told that for various reasons, it would be almost impossible for me to find Hibakusha survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki who were willing to be interviewed. However, I formed a relationship with a group of Hibakusha helpers and made a film of one family who were visiting the UK and have gradually formed a relationship with them. As a result, I have conducted many face-to-face interviews with Hibakusha, their descendants and helpers. The Open University in the UK will upload a digitally accessible archive of these interviews, and a book based on my thesis is coming out soon. I also wrote a play based on the true story of a family which was featured on NHK last year. This short talk will summarize my research approach while also reflecting on my recent work with students and Hibakusha in the atomic bomb oil paintings project known as Genbaku no E at Motomachi High School. My research approach. Hibakusha have recently received renewed prominence following the organization Nihon Hidankyo, founded in 1956, being awarded the 2024 Nobel Peace Prize. Hibakusha, both in Japan and worldwide, are thought to be the voices of authority on the effects of nuclear warfare and testing, both on human beings and the environment. And the prize also reflects the authority and respect they hold worldwide on peace more widely. Through interviews with a family of Hibakusha spanning 3 generations, I gained an understanding that being Hibakusha is an intergenerational phenomenon. It is about how experiences will be passed on to future generations, and it is about how members within a family relate to one another. A Hibakusha told me that she is often asked by the grandchildren and children of survivors to connect them with their elders, as even if they do speak publicly against nuclear weapons, many elders have never been able to share their stories within the family. I work on translation, and so I took a decolonizing approach to my study, which, to quote a leading theorist, involves the various contexts of relations, connections, reciprocity, and responsibility being respected. Sensitivity to cultural background is at a premium in translating Hibakusha experiences. The kanji in Japanese contains characters that can be translated as reason. Your experience and mine are different, but they may be connected in various ways. We cannot transpose one set of understandings into another context, and this is an ethical question as well. The poet Sadako Kurihara from Hiroshima asked, "What do we mean when we say Hiroshima?" The answer perhaps depends on where we stand. For Hibakusha, that may mean their physical experience. Their experiences are all specific, local, and distinct. But for the majority of us who are outsiders, it is a question of where we stand in relation to the historical and ethical issues raised by the first use of nuclear weapons in warfare. Many are of the opinion that Hibakusha stories are sad, scary, and painful to listen to, and this prevents them from engaging with these stories. They even say they do not want to know. But if no one speaks of remarkable things, what happens? As Libyan writer Hisham Matar recently asked of a current conflict in the Middle East in his essay, To Know or Know Not, what do we think we possess when we say we do not know? Hibakusha memory is usually a matter of August 6th and 9th, when the world remembers Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, as the Nobel Prize-winning author, the Nigerian Wole Soyinka, said, memorials can easily become a means of forgetting. Unless we are prepared to engage in a dialogue with one another across differences, memories of Hibakusha, along with those of other survivors of war and genocides, will become ritualized, and as a result, fewer and fewer survivors and their descendants will be willing to share their experiences. In order to understand Hibakusha, perhaps we need an ethical revolution. Coming here after a long gap, I wondered, do Hibakusha feel listened to now? And if so, what kind of listening is taking place? One of the distinctive signs of a bad listener is to interrupt or change the subject. A Hibakusha might want to tell their stories, but unless there is an audience willing to relate to them, they will remain silent. Please listen to Hibakusha, implored the audience member at a recent and current exhibition of Genbaku Noe at Motomachi High School, which I attended. The school was located very close to Ground Zero, where 369 of its students and faculty members fell victim to the atomic bomb. For the past 20 years, Motomachi High School students have been working very closely with Hibakusha to draw pictures of their experiences, creating an invaluable archive which is housed here in the Peace Museum. As Keiko Ogura has written, each painting is the result of repeated painful deliberations between the Hibakusha and the student over a 6 to 10 month period. Genbaku Noe is a form of narrative art. It relies on words to create each picture, which in turn represents an untold story, which is vital for both reconstructing Hiroshima's history, but is also telling a deeply personal, as yet untold story. So the process produces new knowledge. Through a dialogue, and is also an emotional journey for both Hibakusha and pupil. It's a triangular relationship between Hibakusha, pupil, and artwork. If one corner of the triangle was missing, the work would not be successful. Hibakusha also use words like painful and excruciating of their own stories. Many of us would want to avoid the painful experience of listening. But as Kazunoki Hashimoto, one of the originators of the project, encouraged his students, if you are not prepared to go through such painful experiences, your heart can never learn. Remembering Hiroshima means relating to those who experienced devastation, living hell, destruction of humanity, and extinction of humanity. And in these paintings, the suffering of the Hibakusha is conveyed to us in that instant. The pictures remind us that our lives can change for the better or worse in a nanosecond. In other words, they invite us to reflect on our own humanity. As a famous poet wrote, give back human. And the English word to relate also means to tell a story. It is the root verb of relationship. To tell a meaningful story, a relationship must be built between the storyteller and listener. Both artistic expression and human relations are embedded in language and storytelling. Without speaking face-to-face or heart-to-heart, Hibakusha memories cannot exist, and the intention of Hibakusha, which is to spread wide a philosophy of peace through treating all human beings as members of one family, cannot come to fruition. When we speak and listen, we take care of each other, and it was for good reason that Socrates told us that those who have become haters of language become haters of men. My play, Tales from My Grandmother, has emerged from building trustful relationships over a long period of time, and it is focused on the central character, I, which means love in Japanese, who is trying to relate to her grandmother in order to relate her story. We hope to produce a full production if funds are forthcoming. I would like to show you a clip about it now, if we have time. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very impressive presentation with some fantastic pictures. Yeah.
I was asking you about Niichiro. Who was he?
おばあちゃんが教えてくれたことと題したこの劇、広島で10年間にわたって被爆者を取材したイギリスの歴史家エリザベス・イングラムスさんが台本を書き、原爆投下から80年となる来年の本公演に向けて準備が進められています。
I simply cannot accept you as a bride to my son. I should ask about?
8日ロンドンで観客を入れて行われたリハーサルでは、現地で俳優として活動する小村智子さんが被爆者の女性やその体験を聞く孫娘などの役を演じました。女性が被爆者であることを理由に婚約者と結婚できなかった過去を明かすなど、原爆の影響に苦しみ続けている人々の実態が描かれ、観客は真剣に見入っていました。
I found it very moving. Something like this brings it home on an emotional level, and that's really, really important, I think.
I had the idea to try to amplify the voices of the people I met further. I feel that Hidankyo's win is a huge success story. Hey, thank you. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you. So lastly, I would like to welcome the last speaker. So would you start, please?
Thank you very much. My name is Vladisaya Vasileva. I'm honored to be here today and deeply grateful for the opportunity to come to Hiroshima and study here. I'm from Bulgaria, and I also lived in Italy, but for most of my life, I knew very little about Hiroshima. That changed when I happened to be in Japan shortly before President Obama's visit in 2016. Hiroshima had a very strong pull for me. It's a place of profound wisdom that has grown out of suffering. Part of that wisdom concerns questions of justice, responsibility, and how to repair the irreparable. What is justice? Is justice possible after war and inhumane mass killing? And how is it related to peace and building a better future together? These questions marked the beginning of my research. Since then, I have been interested in Hibakusha's philosophy, the history of Hibakusha's social movement, and questions of redress for the consequences of the atomic bombings. So today, I would like to very briefly introduce one of my ongoing research projects. As said many times today, 80 years after the bombings, we all feel a very strong sense of urgency about how we pass on the testimonies and reflections of Hibakusha. This sense of urgency extends to research as well. However, when it comes to scholarship, this crisis is not entirely new, because for decades, scholars have repeatedly called for the consolidation of what we might call Hibakusha studies. So the question is, are we now approaching the point where the opportunity to expand and consolidate this research may be closing? But it may actually be the opposite. With the entry into force of the TPNW and renewed attention to the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, new research directions have begun to emerge. Some scholars, particularly in Europe and North America, have proposed working toward a global nuclear injustice research agenda. From the perspective of Hiroshima, this idea is not completely new, because Hiroshima has long advanced global hibakusha studies. What is new, however, is the growing effort to connect this agenda to transitional justice research and practice. An example is a relatively recent UN Human Rights Council resolution on the nuclear legacy in the Marshall Islands, which recognized the relevance of transitional justice to the struggles of nuclear survivors. Transitional justice may sound complicated, but in simple terms, it is an international field that examines how societies address the consequences of serious human rights violations after conflict or political transition. So it focuses on four main pillars: accountability, truth-telling, legal reform, and victim reparations. So there is this renewed awareness that while there has been extensive international debate about justice after conflict or regime change, there has been far less discussion about justice after nuclear weapons use or testing, and that this imbalance needs to be addressed. So this creates an opportunity to advance hibakusha studies within a broader global justice framework, and one that connects the experiences of nuclear survivors with wider discussions of war and conflict survivors' rights and the responsibilities of nuclear armed states. So I believe this is an opportunity worth exploring, and that Hiroshima needs to actively engage with these developments. The key question then is how to do this in practice. From a research perspective, I think a necessary first step is to identify the common ground between hibakusha studies and transitional justice studies. Hibakusha studies can be understood as a line of research within the broader field of A-bomb studies, but one with several distinctive characteristics. These include, of course, a focus on clarifying the full range of consequences of the atomic bombings. Also, conducting research from the viewpoint, from the perspective of hibakusha. Identifying factors that support hibakusha agency and the recovery of rights and dignity. Also analyzing hibakusha social movements and the perspectives they have developed through lived experience, and examining the measures needed to address the long-term consequences of the bombings. Importantly, many of these characteristics closely overlap with core questions of transitional justice research. So I believe it is indeed possible to establish a meaningful dialogue between these two fields. Transitional justice can offer analytical tools that help further develop hibakusha studies, while research from Hiroshima and Nagasaki can in turn enrich transitional justice understandings of survivors' experiences and voices. For example, one shared research problem in both fields concerns the meaning and significance of continuing to claim victim reparations long after the original wrongdoing occurred. So in my current research, I examine hibakusha perspectives on the measures and symbolic gestures taken by the Japanese and US governments in relation to the atomic bombings. So these include the 1994 A-bomb survivor support law, particularly the unresolved issue of state compensation, and the 2016 visit to Hiroshima by President Obama, including questions about the need for an official US apology. Among hibakusha, opinions on state compensation and apology are diverse and often contrasting. So drawing on existing transitional justice research, just one way to better understand this diversity is to analyze apology and compensation demands from at least three perspectives: how they relate to the harms suffered, how they interact with other measures that have or have not been implemented, and what meanings and significance hibakusha themselves attribute to them. For example, When we look at the relationship between harms suffered and demands for state compensation or apology, research using data collected in 2005 reveals a pattern. Hibakusha who demand state compensation or official apology tend to share similar characteristics. These demands are more common among the most severely affected survivors, those who experience constant health anxiety, very frequent flashbacks or nightmares related to the bombings, and those who feel that the atomic bombings deprive them of important life opportunities. So I am currently conducting interviews, in-depth interviews with Hibakusha to better understand their own perspectives on these issues 8 years after the bombings. And this includes listening carefully also to those who feel that that measures such as state compensation or official apology are not necessary, as well as those who remain uncertain. At the same time, I would like to further explore the possibility of dialogue between Hibakusha studies and transitional justice research. However, I would like to emphasize one important point. Although I have repeatedly referred to transitional justice today, my argument is not that we should simply import overseas research frameworks and apply them to Hiroshima. For example, survivor-centeredness, which means the commitment to reflecting survivors' perspectives and supporting their agency, has been a core feature of Hibakusha studies since the 1960s. And in transitional justice research, this emphasis emerged much later, mainly in the 2000s. This means that Japanese Hibakusha studies can offer valuable lessons and insights to international research on war and conflict survivors. So what I believe we should do now is to further systematize and organize the rich body of research and data that already exists in Japan and, where appropriate, deepen dialogue with related global research paradigms and examining not only common ground, but also possible tensions. And with that, I think my time is up, so I would like to thank you very much for your kind attention.
Okay, thank you very much for your well-organized presentation. So I have a question first to Elizabeth. So would you tell me how Hibakusha felt through the dialogue with Motomachi High School students? That is the question. And I have a question to Saya-san. You touched upon the concept of nuclear justice or nuclear injustice. So if possible, would you tell me the meaning of nuclear justice or nuclear injustice? Because I think that for most audience, this is for the first time to hear this concept.
So, thank you for your question. So Hibakusha have been coming to Motomachi to share their experiences, as I said, for more than 20 years. And in my short observation, I was only able to study for 1 month. The Hibakusha reported very, very good experiences of working with students. And one of the things to say is that it is a painful process, obviously. So the Hibakusha must have decided in advance that they were happy to tell their stories. Many Hibakusha do not want to go back, and it involves going back because you have to give a very detailed account of your experience to the pupil in order for them to be able to draw your picture accurately. So so it involves a big commitment on the part of the survivor, and sometimes they pay up to 10 visits to work with a student on one painting. And the process means that sometimes they have to argue a bit with the student because they really need to help them to express things that are really historically difficult as well for the, plus not just historically but also emotionally difficult for the pupil to find a way to express in art. So it's a big conversation, but what impressed me was they treat the student like a family member. So they will bring gifts, share for home-cooked food with them. And to me, this really articulates this idea that, that we are all a member of the human family. And so it articulates the philosophy of Hibakusha, the way they treat the students with utmost respect. But still, the student really has to work very hard, and there are other situations in which this project hasn't worked, because they really need to get the experience very precisely. And one student who gave her experience, she said that she had tried and tried to get the expression of the feeling of the survivor in the painting. She tried and tried, and she had him as a small boy facing the same direction as the mother who was helping him escape. And then she said, and then the survivor still wasn't happy. And so finally, just before the exhibition of Aburanoe, she changed the expression so that the child was looking up towards the mother. And so I think that's really as well expresses the importance of the human family to us all, and how this is conveyed through paintings. And this was also in the founding directors of the UN really understood this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Nuclear justice, and what does it mean? I think it's very difficult to translate it in Japanese. Nuclear injustice might be much easier to understand, but I think the original expression is nuclear justice because it is actually a call. It is a call from the affected communities, from nuclear survivors. And it has been especially strongly promoted by survivors of nuclear testing in the Marshall Islands. So what it means is that justice after use or testing of nuclear weapons is necessary. So some measures are necessary. But the concept of justice is very similar to the concept of peace, because its meaning is different for different people, for different cultures and different contexts. So the exact meaning needs to be decided by each and every nuclear survivor community. However, there are common themes. So, for example, calls for acknowledgement, calls for recognition of the suffering that has continued for such a long time, calls for fair and adequate compensation, calls for assistance, calls for non-repetition of the same suffering. And these are common to calls of survivors of internal conflict or political transition and regime change in various places around the world. And these cases are studied under transitional justice scholarship. And this is why I wanted to discuss a little bit more this connection today.
Okay, thank you very much. So lastly, I would welcome the Nakamichi-san. So
thank you very much for these very interesting presentations. I have actually a lot of things to say, but what, until what time do we have? 5 minutes? Okay. All right. Maybe I would like to include Mr. Escobar's presentation as well about the youth. What I often say to young peace activists, nuclear weapons abolition activists in Japan, is that if you really want to be effective in this, then you need to understand military affairs as well. When it comes to nuclear weapons, the triads, the bombers and submarines and missiles, and of course nuclear weapons issues are always discussed in conjunction with conventional forces. So you need to be able to articulately discuss with your opponents or those who are in the deterrence community why it is not a good idea to only rely on nuclear deterrence. If you don't have that understanding and good sort of a background in overall strategic affairs or military affairs, you would only stay at the sort of emotional side, and then there will be, as a result, no dialogue with deterrence community. Everything is only resolved through dialogue, and therefore you need to study those military issues as well. So that's one thing. I encourage young people to really look into those issues as well. Elizabeth, I was very moved also that you use theater, those unconventional, if I put it this way, unconventional means of communication to really appeal to people, to really directly understand by their heart why these are really important issues for all of us. And in fact, this, I try to go to various universities around the world to give lectures. One of the top questions that I receive from students today is, why is the United Nations only continue to talk about those things in boring measures like Secretary General's reports that no one reads? And they're right. And they specifically talks about the power of drama, theater, movies, music, arts, because that's how people actually understand those issues. And so I think more efforts really need to be done. And by the way, young people don't read newspapers anymore. We need to use podcasts, TikToks, video, visuals. If we actually are not actually, communicating to people through those other means, we're not going to be able to move the public. So it's very, very important. Now, Vasiljeva, Ms. Vasiljeva, this is justice and nuclear issues, a huge issue. Maybe I will just pick one. If you remember at the last year's Nobel speech, Hidankyo's Tanaka-san, the one that was picked up by Japanese media as only controversial part was his reference to lack of reparation efforts. Now, in Japan, it is really also very sensitive. They were, given compensation on medical grounds, health grounds, but not as a reparation. And there's as Japanese, we all know why that is the case. This was never done for any war victims in Japan. And it's linked to the wartime government leadership responsibilities. That also goes to the huge discussions related to Yasukuni. Why in Yasukuni, those who made the wrong decisions and drove young people and led their death, those leadership people are also in Yasukuni Shrine together with the victims who sacrificed their life for the nation. So, I mean, this is a very complicated issue, and the word justice or injustice, very difficult to translate to Japanese. Seigi, fuseigi, fukosei, kosei. So there are many dimensions of this word justice in itself. I think this is one of the things that I really feel sad as a Japanese. For 80 years, we have, as Japanese, we have a little bit neglected deepening conversations in our own country. What does this really mean for us? And because we didn't really do a sincere efforts by ourselves, forget the Tokyo tribunals, all these things were formal justice mechanisms led by the victors. It was not by genuine indigenous Japanese efforts. Because we didn't do that, there is now, again, we are seeing the resurgence of revisionist historical statements. And that is really a problem that we have in our country. I mean, I say this not as a UN official, but as just one a Japanese citizen. I think probably better late than never. I think we need to pursue this. And by the way, it's interesting to see that both Germany and Italy did do limited, but some reparation efforts after the war for their citizens, not the soldiers, but also the citizens as well. So I hope because I can't see that sort of official governmental efforts will be done in these fields. I count on academia scholarship to continue to work on these issues. But this is a really one of the regrets of the 80 years of our post-history as one simple Japanese citizen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very great comment. So, sorry the clock strikes 4:20, so I have to close today's panel. So now microphone is yours. Okay. So please give them a big hand, please. Okay, thank you very much.
ありがとうございます。佐藤先生、何か一言ございませんか。どうぞ日本語でお願いします。
僕はもう時間大丈夫です。
いや本当に、
はい、私は大丈夫です。
大丈夫ですか。せっかくなんで。日本語で。
いや、
オンリージャパニーズ。
いや皆さんちょっとハンドルがミスってしまいましたね。すみません。あとできる限り多くの質問を受け付けたかったんです。
でもよかったです。質問もコーナーも佐藤先生もどうでした。女性たち3人のお話お三方。
いやすごくもちろん面白かったんですけど、すごいいっぱい僕も質問したかったことがあったんですよね。なんか特に原爆の絵にそもそも注目した理由は何かなとか。
元町高校の原爆の絵。はい。
お話あれば機会があれば、はい、大丈夫でございます。
ありがとうございました。モデレーターは広島市立大学広島平和研究所の佐藤史郎先生、佐藤教授ありがとうございました。